The earth shook beneath the wagon as it careened toward the cliff's edge, the team of horses in a frightened frenzy, their hooves barely touching the ground. Dust billowed in thick clouds as the sun beat down mercilessly on the Arizona territory. Delilah Harrington clutched the side of the wagon with white knuckles, her honey-colored hair whipping across her face as she screamed over the thunderous noise of splintering wood and panicked whinnies. "We're going to die," she cried, her blue calico dress billowing around her legs as the wagon hit another rock, sending her airborne for a terrifying moment. It was 1878, and the journey to Oro Grande had already claimed the life of her father 3 days prior. Now, as the cliff edge loomed ever closer, it seemed the unforgiving land would claim her too. From nowhere, a horse and rider appeared alongside the runaway wagon, keeping pace with the frantic team. The cowboy's face was partially hidden beneath his wide-brimmed hat, but his voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority. "I've got the lines, brace hard," he shouted, leaning dangerously from his saddle to grasp for the leather reins trailing wildly from the lead horse. The wagon lurched violently as his fingers closed around the lines. Delilah watched in horror and hope as the stranger pulled himself closer to the team, his muscles straining beneath his worn shirt as he fought to regain control of the terrified animals. "Hold on, miss," he called back, his voice strained with effort. The edge was mere yards away now, the drop-off a sheer 100 feet to the valley below. The cowboy pulled hard, his horse responding to his commands with practiced precision as they redirected the panicked team. The wagon wheels skidded in the loose dirt, the right side lifting precariously off the ground as they turned away from certain death. For one breathless moment, Delilah felt the wagon begin to tip. She closed her eyes, certain this was her end, when a strong arm wrapped around her waist and yanked her from the bench seat. She found herself suddenly airborne before landing hard against the solid chest of her rescuer, his horse carrying them both safely away as the wagon finally lost its battle with gravity and toppled over the cliff edge with a sickening crash. The cowboy slowed his horse to a stop, both of them breathing heavily as they watched the dust settle where the wagon had disappeared. His arm remained firmly around her waist, her body pressed against his on the saddle. "That was too close," he said finally, his voice a deep rumble she could feel against her back. "You all right, miss?" Delilah turned her head to look at the man who had saved her life. Beneath the dust and sweat, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or so, with striking green eyes and a strong jaw dusted with stubble. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, telling of past dangers faced and overcome. "Yes," she managed, though her voice shook. "Thanks to you, Mr. Brock Porter," he replied, finally releasing his grip on her waist and helping her slide down from his horse. "And you are Delilah Harrington," she said, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you. Everything I own was in that wagon." Brock dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled at the edges, and ran a hand through it before replacing it. "Well, Miss Harrington, I reckon the first order of business is getting you somewhere safe. Oro Grande's about 4 miles east. You got folks waiting there for you." Delilah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes as the reality of her situation sank in. "No. My father and I were traveling to start anew. He died 3 days ago. Fever took him quickly." She swallowed hard. "I was continuing on alone." Brock's expression softened and he glanced toward the cliff edge. "I'm mighty sorry about your pa and your belongings." He hesitated, then added, "I've got a small spread just outside town. Not much, but there's a cabin where you could rest up and figure out your next move." Delilah stiffened, years of her father's warnings about strange men flickering through her mind. "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. My sister Martha lives there too, been running the place since our folks passed." He must have read the hesitation on her face because he added, "Or I can take you straight to town if you prefer. The Butterfly Inn is decent enough, though I can't vouch for what it might cost." Delilah bit her lip, considering her options, which were painfully few. With her father gone and her possessions at the bottom of a ravine, she had nothing but the clothes on her back and the small purse tied at her waist. It wouldn't last long at any inn. "If your sister truly wouldn't mind," she said finally, "I would be grateful for a place to rest, just until I can find work in town." Brock nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth as he extended a hand to help her back onto his horse. "Martha's always complaining about needing another woman around. She'll be pleased as punch to have the company." His hands were calloused but gentle as he lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The solid warmth of him at her back made her uncomfortably aware of how improper their current arrangement was, but given the circumstances, there was little to be done about it. "Hold on tight," he instructed, reaching around her to take the reins. "Oro is a fine enough place once you get to know it, but the journey there can be treacherous, as you've discovered." As they rode, Delilah found herself wondering what twist of fate had placed Brock Porter in her path at exactly the moment she needed saving. The Arizona Territory was vast and largely unpopulated. The chances of anyone being nearby when her team bolted seemed impossibly slim. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Porter?" she asked over her shoulder, trying to keep her mind off the warmth of his chest against her back. "Just Brock is fine," he replied. "I was tracking some strays. Few head of cattle wandered off in the night." He paused. "Lucky thing too, or I mightn't have heard your wagon." The sun was beginning to set by the time they approached a modest homestead nestled against the foothills. A small cabin sat at the center, smoke curling from its chimney with a barn and corral to one side. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was well kept, with a small garden plot beside the house and chickens pecking around the yard. A woman stepped out onto the porch as they approached, wiping her hands on an apron. She was younger than Delilah had expected, perhaps only 20, with the same dark hair and green eyes as her brother. "Brock Porter," she called out, hands on her hips. "Where in heaven's name have you been all day, and who is that with you?" Brock helped Delilah down before dismounting himself. "Found some of our strays," he replied, "and then came across Miss Harrington here in a spot of trouble. Her wagon went over the East Ridge. She's lost everything." Martha's expression immediately softened. "Oh, you poor thing. Come in, you must be exhausted." She shot her brother a look. "And hungry too, I expect, since this one probably didn't think to offer you so much as a sip of water." Brock began, but Martha was already ushering Delilah toward the house. "Never mind him. Men have no sense sometimes. I'm Martha, as I'm sure he's told you, and you're welcome here as long as you need." Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a large fireplace dominating one wall and a scrubbed wooden table in the center. The scent of something savory filled the air, making Delilah's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. The past few days had been a blur of grief and determination. Sit," Martha insisted, pulling out a chair. "Stew's just about ready, and there's fresh bread too. Brock, fetch some water for washing up, would you?" As Brock disappeared outside, Martha leaned in conspiratorially. "He's a good man, my brother. Best in the territory, though I'd never tell him so. Saved you, did he?" Delilah nodded, feeling tears threaten again. "If he hadn't come along when he did, I'd be at the bottom of that ravine with my wagon." Martha squeezed her shoulder. "Well, you're safe now, and you'll stay until you're back on your feet, no arguments." That night, after a hearty meal that nearly had her nodding off at the table, Delilah was shown to a small room off the main living area. It was simple, with just a bed, a small chest, and a window overlooking the mountains, but it was clean and warm. "It ain't much," Brock said from the doorway, looking almost embarrassed, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." "It's perfect," Delilah replied sincerely. "I can't thank you both enough." He nodded, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest. Morning comes early around here." As he turned to leave, Delilah called after him, "Mr. Porter Brock, how did you happen to be there at just the right moment?" He paused, silhouetted in the doorway. "Sometimes fate has a way of putting us where we need to be, I reckon." Then, with a slight tip of his hat, he was gone. Delilah slept better that night than she had in weeks, the exhaustion of her ordeal finally catching up with her. When she woke, sunlight was already streaming through the small window, and the smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Martha greeted her with a bright smile as she emerged, sleep-rumpled, from the bedroom. "Good morning. Thought you might sleep the day away. Brock's already been out since dawn." "I should have been up to help," Delilah said, embarrassed. Martha waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. You needed the rest." She placed a plate of food on the table. "Eat up, then we can see about finding you something else to wear. Can't have you in the same dress day in and day out." After breakfast, Martha rummaged through a trunk and produced several dresses and undergarments. "These might be a bit short on you. You've got a good few inches on me, but they'll do until we can get to town and see about getting you properly outfitted." "I couldn't possibly accept." "You can and you will," Martha interrupted firmly. "What good are they doing sitting in a trunk?" "Besides," she added with a wink, "Brock nearly broke his neck trying not to stare at you last night. Man's been alone too long, if you ask me." Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Martha just laughed. "Of course not." "Now get changed and I'll show you around the place. If you're staying, might as well know where everything is." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Delilah helped Martha with the household chores, grateful to have something to do to repay the siblings' kindness. Brock was often out from dawn till dusk, tending to the cattle and horses that comprised their modest ranch. When he was around, Delilah found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the way he moved with quiet confidence, the rare but transformative nature of his smile, the gentleness with which he treated both animals and people. On the fourth day, Delilah was hanging laundry when Brock approached, leading his horse. "Heading into town," he said, adjusting his hat against the bright sunlight. "Thought you might want to come along, see about finding work if you're still set on that." Delilah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, I'd like that. Let me just tell Martha." The ride to Oro Grande was different in daylight, the landscape a stunning mix of red earth and scrubby vegetation, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. Brock pointed out landmarks as they went, telling her which areas to avoid and which trails were safest. "Been meaning to ask," he said as the town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a dusty main street. "What sort of work were you hoping to find?" "I taught school back in Missouri," Delilah replied, "but I'm not particular. I can sew, cook, keep books." Brock nodded thoughtfully. "Town's growing, might be there looking for a school teacher, worth asking at least." Oro Grande was bustling with activity as they rode in. Miners, cowboys, merchants, and families all went about their business under the hot Arizona sun. Delilah felt eyes on her as they made their way down the main street, aware that a new face, particularly a female one, was cause for interest in such a place. Brock seemed to notice her discomfort. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "New folks are a curiosity is all. They'll lose interest soon enough." He helped her down in front of a general store, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "I've got some business to attend to. Meet you back here in an hour." Delilah nodded, smoothing down the borrowed dress. "Thank you. I'll see what I can find out about work opportunities." As it happened, the storekeeper's wife was a wealth of information. When Delilah mentioned her teaching experience, the woman's eyes lit up. "We've been hoping to start a proper school," she said excitedly. "Been teaching the young ones myself in the back room here, but with the new families moving in, it's getting to be too much. You should speak with Mr. Hollister, he's head of the town council." By the time Brock returned, Delilah was nearly bubbling with excitement. "They need a teacher," she told him as they walked to the town's small restaurant for a meal. "Mr. Hollister says they've been setting aside funds to build a schoolhouse, but they need someone qualified to teach." "They've offered me the position, Brock." His smile was genuine, if a touch reserved. "That's wonderful news. When would you start?" "As soon as possible." "They're using the back room of the church for now until the schoolhouse is built." She hesitated. "I'll need to find lodgings in town, of course." Something flickered across Brock's face, disappointment perhaps, but it was gone so quickly she thought she might have imagined it. "Of course," he said, holding the restaurant door for her. "Mrs. Butterfield at the Butterfly Inn has rooms for rent, I believe." Over their meal, Delilah found herself torn. The teaching position was exactly what she had hoped for, yet the thought of leaving the Porter homestead filled her with an unexpected sadness. In just a few days, Martha had become like a sister to her, and Brock Brock was becoming something she wasn't quite ready to name. As they rode back to the ranch that afternoon, the setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape. Delilah found herself watching Brock's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the light caught in his dark hair. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, catching her gaze. Delilah looked away, embarrassed. "Just thinking about how quickly life can change. A week ago, I was traveling with my father. Then I was alone, nearly died, and now I'm starting a new life as Oro Grande school teacher." Brock was quiet for a moment. "Change isn't always bad, though sometimes it comes at a steep price." He glanced at her. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you," she said softly. "He was a good man, wanted a fresh start after my mother passed. I think he would be pleased about the teaching position." When they arrived back at the homestead, Martha was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Well," she demanded as soon as they dismounted. "How was town? Did you find work?" As Delilah shared her news, she noticed the same flicker of disappointment cross Martha's face that she'd seen on Brock's. "That's wonderful," Martha said, though her enthusiasm seemed forced. "Of course, we'll miss having you here." "I can't thank you both enough for everything you've done," Delilah said, emotion tightening her throat. "I don't know what would have become of me if Brock hadn't come along when he did." Later that evening, after Martha had gone to bed, Delilah found Brock sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the star-filled sky. She sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "Beautiful night," she remarked, tilting her head back to take in the vast expanse above them. He agreed. "One of the things I love most about this place, you can see clear to forever on nights like this." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the distant howl of a coyote and the soft chirp of crickets. "I'll ride with you to town on Monday," Brock said finally. "Help you get settled at the inn." "Thank you," Delilah replied, then, gathering her courage, added, "Though I was thinking, it's quite a ride from town to here. Perhaps I could stay on a bit longer. Just until the schoolhouse is built and I can find more permanent lodgings. I'd pay room and board, of course." Brock turned to look at her, surprise and something warmer lighting his eyes. "You don't need to pay a thing, and you're welcome to stay as long as you like." "Martha would skin me alive if I suggested otherwise." Delilah smiled, relieved. "She's been so kind, you both have." "It's not been entirely selfless," Brock admitted, his voice dropping lower. "Having you here, it's brought something back to the place. Something that's been missing since our parents passed." His gaze held hers for a long moment, and Delilah felt her breath catch. There was something unspoken passing between them, something new and fragile and full of possibility. The spell was broken by a gust of wind that sent a shiver through her. Brock immediately stood, offering his hand to help her up. "You should get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's Sunday. Thought I might show you some of the prettier parts of the property if you're interested." Delilah took his hand, feeling the now familiar warmth of his calloused palm against hers. "I'd like that very much." Sunday dawned clear and bright. After a hearty breakfast, Brock saddled 2 horses his own and a gentle mare for Delilah. "Ever ridden before?" he asked as he helped her mount. Delilah gathered the reins, feeling both nervous and excited. "A few times, though never alone." Brock adjusted her stirrups, his hands efficiently checking the saddle. "Daisy here is gentle as they come. Just follow my lead and you'll be fine." They rode at a leisurely pace, Brock pointing out features of the landscape and telling stories about growing up on the ranch. He had a quiet way about him that Delilah found immensely comfortable, a stark contrast to the boisterous men she'd encountered on their journey west. "How did you come to be here?" she asked as they paused by a small stream to let the horses drink. "Have you always lived in Oro Grande?" Brock dismounted, helping her down before answering. "Our folks came out from Tennessee when I was 12, Martha just 8. Pa had a dream of ranching in the open country," he smiled ruefully. "Reality was a sight harder than the dream, but he was stubborn, built this place from nothing. And your parents, you mentioned they passed." Pain flickered across his face. 3 years ago, influenza swept through the area. Took a lot of good people." He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "Martha and I had it too, but we pulled through, been running the place since." "I'm sorry," Delilah said softly. "That must have been terribly difficult." Brock nodded, his gaze distant. Was touch and go for a while. Some folks in town thought we ought to sell up, said a woman had no business on a ranch and I was too young to manage alone. His jaw tightened. Proved them wrong, though. Ranch is doing better now than it ever has. You should be proud, Delilah said. Not many could have accomplished what you have. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Delilah felt something shift between them. Thank you for that, he said simply. They continued their ride to a high point overlooking the valley, where they spread a blanket Martha had packed for them and shared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. Your sister thinks of everything, Delilah remarked, taking a bite of apple. Brock chuckled. Martha's got a practical mind, says I'd forget my own head if it weren't attached. His expression grew more serious. She likes having you around, we both do. Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. I've enjoyed being here more than I can say after everything that happened. It's been like finding an oasis in the desert. They returned to the ranch as the sun was beginning to set, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and pinks. Delilah found herself wishing the day would never end, that they could continue riding together beneath the vast Arizona sky indefinitely. As Brock helped her dismount, his hands at her waist, she was acutely aware of how close they stood. For a moment she thought he might say something, might acknowledge the growing connection between them, but Martha called from the house, breaking the spell. There you are. I was beginning to worry. Supper's nearly ready. The next few weeks settled into a rhythm. Delilah began teaching in the makeshift classroom at the church, riding to town with Brock each morning and returning to the ranch in the evenings. The children were eager to learn, and the parents grateful to have a proper teacher at last. The town council was moving forward with plans for the schoolhouse, and Delilah found herself consulting on its design and furnishings. In the evenings and on weekends, she helped around the ranch, learning from Martha how to tend the garden and make soap, and occasionally riding out with Brock to check on the cattle. She discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed, an ability to adapt and thrive in this harsh but beautiful land, and all the while, her feelings for Brock deepened. She saw how he cared for his sister, his animals, his land with a quiet devotion that spoke volumes about his character. She noticed the small kindnesses he showed to everyone, from the oldest widow in town to the youngest child. And she felt the way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening in late June, nearly a month after her arrival, a summer storm blew in with startling ferocity. Brock had ridden out earlier to check on some calves, and as thunder cracked overhead and rain lashed at the windows, Delilah found herself growing increasingly anxious. He'll be fine, Martha assured her, though her own glances at the door betrayed her concern. Brock knows this land better than anyone. He'll have found shelter. But as the hours passed and the storm showed no signs of abating, Delilah's worry intensified. What if he's hurt? What if the lightning— Don't, Martha interrupted firmly. Don't go borrowing trouble. Brock's smart and he's careful. Just as Delilah was about to suggest they form a search party, though whom they would ask in the middle of such a storm, she wasn't sure the door burst open. Brock stumbled in, soaked to the skin and shivering but very much alive. Brock. Both women rushed to him, Martha immediately pulling blankets from a chest while Delilah helped him remove his sodden coat. I'm all right, he insisted through chattering teeth. Got caught out by the storm, had to wait it out in that old line shack on the north property. You're freezing, Delilah said, feeling his icy hands. Martha, heat some water for a bath quickly. Between them, they managed to get Brock warmed up, fed, and into dry clothes. As Martha bustled about clearing away the dishes, Delilah sat beside him near the fire, relief making her slightly lightheaded. You had us worried, she said softly. Brock looked at her, firelight dancing across his features. Were you worried about me, Miss Harrington? There was a teasing quality to his voice that was new. Of course I was, she replied, too relieved to be coy. I was imagining all sorts of terrible scenarios. His expression softened and he reached out to touch her hand just briefly. I'm touched by your concern. But it takes more than a storm to keep me from coming home. Home. The word resonated with Delilah in a way she hadn't expected. This place, these people in the span of a month, they had become home to her in a way nowhere had been since her mother's death years ago. The following Saturday, the town of Oro Grande held its annual summer social, a gathering that drew people from miles around for food, music, and dancing. Martha insisted they all attend, overriding Brock's half-hearted protests. "We need to celebrate," she declared. "The schoolhouse foundation is laid, the ranch is thriving, and for once we're all healthy and whole. Besides," she added with a meaningful glance at Delilah, "it'll be a chance to wear that new dress we finished." The dress in question was a lovely blue calico that Martha had helped her sew, using fabric purchased in town with Delilah's first teaching wages. It was more fashionable than anything she'd owned before, with a nipped waist and a modestly scooped neckline that nevertheless showed more collarbone than her usual attire. When she emerged from her room that evening, ready for the social, she was gratified by the look on Brock's face, a mixture of appreciation and something deeper that made her heart race. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm as they walked to the wagon. The town square was transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung between buildings and tables laden with food provided by the townspeople. A small band played lively tunes, and couples were already dancing in the cleared space at the center. As they arrived, Delilah was immediately surrounded by her students and their parents, all eager to speak with the new teacher. Brock drifted away, talking with ranchers and miners, though she noticed his gaze frequently finding her across the crowd. "Miss Harrington," a voice at her elbow said, and she turned to find Daniel Thornton, the town's young banker, beside her. "Might I have the pleasure of this dance?" Before she could respond, another voice cut in. "I believe Miss Harrington promised the first dance to me." Brock stood there, his expression unreadable as he held out his hand to Delilah. She hadn't, in fact, promised him any dances, but she found herself taking his hand without hesitation. "Perhaps another time, Mr. Thornton," she said politely as Brock led her to the dance floor. As they joined the other couples in a lively reel, Brock leaned close to her ear. "Hope you don't mind the interruption. Thornton's been eyeing you all evening like a prize heifer at auction." Delilah laughed, surprised by the hint of jealousy in his tone. "I don't mind at all. Though I don't recall promising you a dance, Mr. Porter." His hands were warm and sure on her waist as they turned. "Consider it payment for saving your life," he replied with a rare grin that transformed his face. They danced 3 songs together before Martha insisted on introducing Delilah to more townspeople. The evening wore on pleasantly, with good food, lively music, and plenty of conversation, but Delilah found her attention continually drawn to Brock. He moved through the crowd with easy confidence, respected by the men and admired by the women, though he seemed oblivious to the latter. As the night deepened and families with young children began to depart, the band shifted to slower, more romantic tunes. Delilah had just finished a conversation with the mayor's wife when Brock appeared at her side once more. "One more dance?" he asked, his voice low. The song was a slow waltz, and as Brock drew her into his arms, Delilah was acutely aware of their closeness. His hand at the small of her back, her palm against his shoulder, their faces mere inches apart as they moved to the gentle rhythm. "I've been thinking," Brock said after a moment, his voice so quiet she had to strain to hear him over the music, "about you staying at the ranch." Delilah's heart sank. Had she overstayed her welcome? "I can make other arrangements," she began, but he shook his head. "That's not what I meant. He seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man typically so straightforward. "I meant that I'd like you to stay. Not as our guest or a boarder, but as more." The music seemed to fade away, along with the chatter and laughter of the crowd. All Delilah could focus on was Brock's face, the earnest look in his green eyes, the slight furrow between his brows as he awaited her response. "Brock," she whispered, "what exactly are you asking?" He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you might consider a more permanent arrangement, if you might consider me." Before she could respond, a commotion near the edge of the square drew everyone's attention. Shouts rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. "Everyone down," Brock shouted, instinctively pulling Delilah close and shielding her with his body as chaos erupted around them. Through the confusion, Delilah could make out several men on horseback at the edge of the gathering, their faces concealed by bandanas. One held a smoking gun pointed skyward. "This is a robbery," the apparent leader called out. "Everyone stay calm and no one gets hurt. We just want the bank's money and any valuables you find folks are carrying." Beside her, Delilah felt Brock tense. "The Wallace gang," he muttered. "They've been hitting towns up and down the territory." As the bandits began moving through the crowd, collecting watches, jewelry, and money, Brock slowly shifted, keeping Delilah behind him while scanning the area. "When I give the signal," he whispered, "I want you to slip away and find the sheriff. He's probably at the jail." "I'm not leaving you," she hissed back, clutching his arm. Before they could argue further, one of the bandits approached them, gun drawn. Well, what do we have here? Hand over your valuables, mister, and maybe I won't take your pretty lady for good measure." Delilah felt Brock's muscles coil, ready to spring, and she tightened her grip on his arm in warning. A confrontation now would only lead to bloodshed. "We don't want trouble," she said, stepping slightly forward despite Brock's attempt to keep her behind him. She removed the simple gold locket from around her neck, her mother's, one of the few keepsakes she'd been wearing rather than packing in the ill-fated wagon. "This is all we have." The bandit reached for the locket, and in that moment of distraction, chaos erupted from another direction. The sheriff and several deputies, who must have been alerted by someone who slipped away, opened fire from the edge of the square. The bandits returned fire, and the peaceful social dissolved into a gunfight. Down. Brock shouted, pulling Delilah to the ground and covering her with his body as bullets whizzed overhead. All around them, people screamed and sought cover behind tables and wagons. In the melee, Delilah lost sight of Martha and felt panic rise in her throat. "Martha," she called. "Where's Martha?" Brock's face paled. "Stay here," he ordered, and before she could stop him, he was crawling away, staying low as he moved through the scattered crowd in search of his sister. Terrified but determined, Delilah followed, keeping close to the ground as Brock had shown her. She spotted Martha huddled beneath a table with several other women, apparently unharmed, and was about to call out when she saw one of the bandits take aim at Brock's unprotected back. Without thinking, Delilah lunged forward, shoving Brock aside just as the gun fired. Pain exploded in her upper arm, hot and sharp, and she cried out as she fell. "Delilah." Brock's voice seemed to come from very far away, though his face appeared above hers almost instantly. "Oh God, you're hit." The gunfight was ending as quickly as it had begun, with the bandits retreating and the sheriff's men in pursuit. The town doctor was already moving among the wounded, and Brock frantically waved him over. "It's just my arm," Delilah managed, though the pain was making her dizzy. "I'm all right." Brock's face was ashen as the doctor cut away her sleeve to reveal the bullet wound. "It went clean through," the doctor announced. "She's lucky. An inch to the left and it would have hit bone." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and confusion as the doctor cleaned and bandaged her wound, gave her laudanum for the pain, and instructed Brock on her care. By the time they loaded her into the wagon to return to the ranch, Delilah was floating on a haze of medication, the pain reduced to a distant throb. She was vaguely aware of Brock carrying her into the house, of Martha's worried face hovering nearby, of being settled gently into her bed. But most clearly, she remembered Brock's voice, low and intense as he sat beside her. "Why did you do that? Why would you put yourself in danger like that?" Through the fog of laudanum, she found his hand and squeezed it weakly. "Couldn't let them hurt you, not when I love you." Whether she actually spoke those words aloud or merely thought them, Delilah couldn't later say. But she remembered the feel of Brock's lips against her forehead before sleep claimed her. The next few days were a haze of sleep, pain, and brief periods of wakefulness during which Martha or Brock would help her eat, drink, and take more laudanum. The wound was healing clean, the doctor assured them during his visit, but Delilah would need rest to fully recover. It was nearly a week before she was able to sit up for extended periods. The laudanum reduced to occasional doses when the pain grew too intense. During that time, Martha had been a constant presence, but Brock had seemed strangely distant, appearing only to check on her progress before disappearing again to work on the ranch. "Have I done something wrong?" Delilah asked Martha one afternoon as the younger woman helped her change her bandage. Brock seems different, Martha sighed, securing the fresh bandage with gentle fingers. My brother is a complicated man. When you were shot, I've never seen him so frightened, not even when our parents died. But I'm recovering well, Delilah pointed out. Why would he avoid me now? Because, came Brock's voice from the doorway, startling them both, I can't bear to see you hurt because of me. Martha gave her brother a long look, then squeezed Delilah's good hand. I'll leave you two to talk. She gathered the soiled bandages and slipped from the room, closing the door softly behind her. Brock remained by the door, his hat in his hands, looking more uncertain than Delilah had ever seen him. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, she replied. Strong enough to wonder why you've been avoiding me. He crossed the room slowly, taking the chair Martha had vacated. I haven't been avoiding you. I've been thinking about what happened at the social. He swallowed hard. About what I asked you before the shooting started. About how you pushed me out of the way of that bullet. Delilah's pulse quickened. I remember. Do you remember what you said after? When I asked why you'd done such a foolish thing, she shook her head slowly. Much of that night is a blur, the laudanum. Brock nodded, his expression unreadable. You said you couldn't let them hurt me because you loved me. Heat flooded Delilah's cheeks. Had she really confessed her feelings in such a state? I don't remember saying that. Did you mean it? His directness took her breath away. Delilah looked down at her hands, then back up at his face, finding the courage to be equally direct. Yes, I meant it. I do love you, Brock. It's happened so quickly, I hardly understand it myself, but there it is. The tension seemed to drain from him all at once. Thank God, he breathed, taking her hand in both of his. I've been half out of my mind thinking I'd imagined it or that it was just the laudanum talking. And what about what you asked me? Before the shooting, Delilah pressed, heart hammering in her chest. Brock's smile was slow and sweet. I asked if you might consider a more permanent arrangement, if you might consider me as my wife, Delilah Harrington. He lifted her hand to his lips. I love you. I think I've loved you since I saw you clutching that wagon for dear life, too stubborn to give up even when death was staring you in the face. And I know it's fast and maybe crazy, but I can't imagine this ranch, this life, without you in it. Tears welled in Delilah's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, Brock Porter. He leaned forward then, careful of her injured arm, and kissed her a gentle, tender kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Brock rested his forehead against hers. I was so afraid, he admitted. When I saw you fall, when I saw the blood, I thought I'd lost you before I even had the chance to make you mine. It will take more than a bullet to keep me from coming home. Delilah echoed his words from the night of the storm and was rewarded with his laugh, warm and rich. The door burst open and Martha stood there, barely containing her excitement. Well, am I to have a sister at last? Brock looked at Delilah, love shining in his eyes. You are, little sister, if she'll have us both. As if there was ever any doubt, Martha exclaimed, rushing to embrace them both carefully. Oh, this calls for celebration. I'll bake a cake for supper. As Martha hurried off to the kitchen, Brock and Delilah shared another soft kiss. She's going to be impossible to live with now, he murmured against Delilah's lips, planning the wedding, fussing over every detail. I think it's wonderful, Delilah replied, to have family again. It's more than I dared hope for when I set out for Oro Grande. Over the next few weeks, as Delilah's arm healed and summer gave way to early autumn, plans for their wedding took shape. The schoolhouse was nearly complete, and they decided to hold the ceremony there as its first official function, a fitting symbol, Brock said, of their new beginning together. Word spread quickly through Oro Grande and the surrounding area, and soon it seemed everyone was contributing something to the celebration. The women of the town helped Martha prepare Delilah's wedding dress, a beautiful creation of cream-colored satin with lace that misses. Henderson at the general store had specially ordered from back east. The men, led by the town's carpenter, crafted a beautiful bed frame of polished oak as a wedding gift to replace the simple one in what would become their shared bedroom at the ranch. Even Delilah's students became involved, creating decorations for the schoolhouse and practicing a special song to perform at the ceremony under Martha's direction. The day before the wedding, As Delilah stood in the newly completed schoolhouse overseeing the final decorations, she felt a moment of overwhelming gratitude. Just months ago, she had been facing death on the edge of a cliff, everything she owned plummeting into the ravine below. Now she stood on the precipice of a different kind, the beginning of a life with a man she loved, in a community that had welcomed her as one of their own. Penny for your thoughts. She turned to find Brock watching her from the doorway, hat in hand, looking so handsome in his clean work clothes that her heart skipped. Just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't come along when you did that day, she replied, crossing to meet him. He took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. I thank God every day that I was there, that I heard your wagon, that I was able to reach you in time. I do too, she leaned up to kiss him softly, though Martha says we shouldn't be seeing each other today. Something about bad luck before the wedding. Brock grinned, that rare, transformative expression that never failed to make her breath catch. Martha's been filling your head with superstitions again. Besides, I couldn't stay away, not when I have something to show you. What is it? A surprise. He tugged gently on her hands. Come with me. Intrigued, Delilah followed him outside to where his horse was tethered. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her, his arms encircling her as he took the reins. They rode away from town, toward the ranch, but taking a different path than usual. After about 20 minutes, they crested a small hill, and Brock drew the horse to a halt. Below them, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by cottonwood trees, was a cabin newly built, from the look of the fresh-cut lumber and the sawdust still visible around its perimeter. Brock, Delilah breathed, what is this? His arms tightened slightly around her waist. Our home, if you want it. I know you love the ranch, but I thought you might like a place that's just ours. It's still on Porter land, just a short ride from the main house. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes as she took in the small cabin with its covered porch and chimney. You built this. When? Started it the day after you agreed to marry me. The men from town helped when they could, same ones who built the schoolhouse. It's not fancy, but it's solid. There's a bedroom, a main room with a fireplace, a small kitchen. Room to add on as we need it. As he spoke, Delilah could see it all, their life together in this little cabin, children running in and out, a garden growing alongside, their love filling every corner of the home he had built with his own hands. It's perfect, she whispered, turning in the saddle to face him. Absolutely perfect. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, his hand cradling her face as if she were the most precious thing in the world. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. Tomorrow, he murmured, tomorrow you'll be my wife. And you'll be my husband, she replied, the words still new enough to send a thrill through her. For always. They rode back to town in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of the future they would build together. When they reached the schoolhouse, Brock helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. Until tomorrow, he said, pressing a final kiss to her lips before reluctantly releasing her. The wedding day dawned clear and golden, the October sky a perfect blue overhead. Martha helped Delilah dress in the back room of the schoolhouse, fussing over every detail of her appearance. You look beautiful, Martha said finally, stepping back to survey her handiwork. Delilah's honey-colored hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with small white flowers. The cream satin dress fit perfectly, emphasizing her slender waist and falling in elegant folds to the floor. I hardly recognize myself, Delilah admitted, turning to look in the small mirror they'd brought. Wait until Brock sees you, Martha said with a grin. He'll be struck speechless, and you know how rare that is. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Sheriff Davis, who had agreed to escort Delilah down the aisle in her father's stead. It's time, ladies, he called. Everyone's seated and the preacher's getting impatient. Martha gave Delilah one last hug. Ready to become Mrs. Porter? More than ready, Delilah replied, her heart full to bursting. The schoolhouse had been transformed. Autumn flowers and greenery adorned every surface, and sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the assembled townspeople who stood as the music began. And there at the front, waiting beside the preacher, stood Brock. He wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was the look in his eyes as he watched her approach that Delilah would remember forever, a look of such pure love and wonder that it brought tears to her eyes. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. They exchanged simple vows and rings. Brock had ridden all the way to Tucson to find a matched pair, simple gold bands that symbolized their unending commitment. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared, beaming at them both. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Porter." As Brock's lips met hers, sealing their union amid the cheers of their friends and neighbors, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that fate had led her to exactly where she belonged. The loose team dragging a wagon toward the edge had seemed like disaster, but it had brought her to this moment, to this man, to this life filled with love and promise. The celebration afterward spilled out of the schoolhouse and into the town square, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the festive scene, Brock found Delilah among the well-wishers and drew her aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Porter?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. The title sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Yes," she replied simply. "Take me home." They said their goodbyes amid good-natured teasing and well-wishes, then mounted Brock's horse for the ride to their new cabin. As they approached, Delilah gasped in delight. Someone Martha, she suspected, had strung lanterns along the porch and placed flowers in the windows. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, promising warmth against the cool evening air. Brock dismounted first, then reached up for her. But instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms, carrying her the last few steps to their door. "Welcome home, wife," he said, pushing the door open with his foot and carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was simple but beautiful. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the main room with its wooden table and chairs, a small sofa covered in a colorful quilt, and shelves already stocked with books and essentials. Through an open door, she could see their bedroom, the new oak bed made up with fresh linens and more of Martha's quilts. Brock set her gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she replied, turning in his embrace to face him. "And I love you, Brock Porter." His eyes darkened as he gazed down at her. "And I love you, Delilah Porter, more than I have words to say." As his lips found hers in the firelight of their new home, Delilah knew that whatever challenges they might face in the years ahead, they would face them together. The wild Arizona territory had nearly claimed her life that day on the cliff's edge, but instead, it had given her a new one, a life filled with love, purpose, and the promise of tomorrow. 5 years later, Delilah stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Brock taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. Martha stood beside her, bouncing Delilah's 18-month-old daughter, Rose, on her hip. "He's a natural," Martha observed as young James confidently took the reins, his father's hand steady on his back. "Just like his pa," Delilah smiled, resting a hand on her slightly rounded belly where their third child grew. "He certainly is." Though Rose seems more inclined toward books than horses. "A teacher, like her mama," Martha agreed, kissing the toddler's chubby cheek. "The best in all of Arizona territory if the town council is to be believed." The schoolhouse in Oro Grande had flourished under Delilah's guidance, growing from a dozen students to nearly 30 as the town expanded. She still taught 3 days a week, with a young assistant handling the other 2 days so Delilah could balance her teaching with her family and life on the ranch, which had prospered under Brock's careful management. As she watched her husband lift their laughing son high into the air, his face alight with joy, Delilah's heart swelled with gratitude for the life they had built together. From the edge of disaster to the fullness of love, their journey had been one of courage, faith, and the unshakable bond between them. "Mama, watch me," James called, waving excitedly as Brock settled him back on the pony. "I'm watching, sweetheart," she called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Later that evening, after the children were asleep and Martha had returned to the main house where she now lived with her own husband, a blacksmith who'd moved to town 3 years earlier, Brock and Delilah sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "Happy?" Brock asked, his arm warm around her shoulders as they swayed gently. Delilah leaned into him, her head finding its familiar place against his chest. Completely you, more than I ever thought possible. He placed his free hand on the gentle swell of her belly. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am, that I happened to be there that day, that you agreed to stay, that you loved me back. It wasn't luck, Delilah replied softly. It was destiny. As they sat together beneath the star-studded sky, the ranch peaceful around them, Delilah thought of how close she had come to a very different fate. One loose team, one wagon teetering on the edge, one cowboy with the courage to act, and her entire life had changed. "I've got you," Brock murmured, echoing words spoken long ago, "always." "And I've got you," she replied, tilting her face up for his kiss. In the vastness of the Arizona territory, on a ranch carved from wilderness through determination and love, they had found not just survival, but a life more beautiful than either could have imagined. Together, they had built a home, a family, and a future, proving that sometimes the edge of disaster is simply the beginning of the greatest adventure of all.